Namaste. Welcome you all for the Safety of Women in Workplace awareness program. Such awareness programs are recommended by Government of India to curb the violence against women at workplace, to protect the fundamental right of a woman to equality. An act is passed and the name of this act is Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act 2013. Under this act, all the institutions should have internal complaints committee for women. We have internal complaint committee for women in JIPMER. Safety of women is the responsibility of the employer. Each human has responsibilities as an individual as well as an universal being. Both men and women need equality. Indian Constitution gives the fundamental right to life and to live with dignity. United Nations has conventions for elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, and man must pay attention to inequality in the surroundings. We see that the girl child is denied of education due to the lack of education. There is no confidence and financial independence for women. They are assigned with marriage and motherhood, and this has resulted into the gender stereotypes in the society, which gives a scope for sexual harassment of women at workplace. To nip the bud of sexual harassment of women at workplace is our responsibility. Prevention, prohibition and redressal should be by the people, for the people. You see this picture. In 1992, Srimati Bhanwari Devi was selected as an agent to work against the child marriage in Rajasthan. She prevented marriage of 1-year-old girl child, and that resulted into resentment in the community. Community men started harassing her. She went to the higher authorities with a complaint, but there was no response, and this has resulted into great loss to humanity. The community men gang raped Bhanwari Devi and killed her brutally. We see millions of women have to face the sexually offensive behavior from other gender in workplace. So, this act is very important. What is the purpose of the awareness of such programs? We see that millions of women in every walks of life are exposed to discrimination. The violence of discrimination and exploitation continues in the society. If nothing has been done to prevent the harm, and it will escalate to this extent as what happened to Srimati Bhanwari Devi. The society suddenly got alarmed. In 1997, landmark judgment Vishakha versus States of Rajasthan was raised by Supreme Court as guidelines to curb the violence. And in 2013, the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act 2013, this appeared in part 2 section 3 of the Gazette of India, and this act came into force on 9th December 2013. What are the objects of this act? The objects of this act are: no woman shall be subject to sexual harassment at any workplace. Prevention and redressal of the complaints of sexual harassment must be done. this act shifts the accountability from an individual to institutions, and there are three key obligations on the employer: prohibition, prevention and redress. Who is the employer according to this act? It extends to government organizations, private organizations and dwelling place such as house also is this employer definition is extended. Who is aggrieved woman? In workplace, a woman of any age, whether employed or not, who alleges to have been subjected to any act of sexual harassment by the respondent is an aggrieved woman, and this is extended to dwelling place such as house also. About the act, this act is applicable to whole India. For us, the appropriate government is a central government, and the existence of a chairperson under subsection 1 of section 1 in this act, and our employer here is director of the institute, who is supposed to constitute the internal complaint committee under section 4. We all are responsible for prevention of sexual harassment in workplace. The first step towards prevention is to recognize that the workplace sexual harassment is a behavior that is unwelcome, sexual in nature, and it is a subjective experience of the woman. It is the impact and not the intent, that is what it matters according to the act, and it often occurs in the matrix of power. This act gives the definitions of sexual harassment at workplace, internal complaint committee and the workplace definitions. The sexual harassment includes unwelcome acts or behavior, namely physical contact or advances, a demand or request for sexual favors, making sexually colored remarks, showing pornography, any other unwelcome physical, verbal or non-verbal conduct of sexual nature, whether directly or by implication, is included in these acts. Unwelcome acts. The definition of sexual harassment is according to the Vishakha case judgment in 1997. It includes workplace sexual harassment of unwelcome sexual behavior. To recognize that, one can see what is defined in this act. A woman who undergoes sexual harassment feels bad. It has a very bad effect on her psychology. She feels it is one-sided from that end and unwanted for her. She feels powerless, weak, and it generates a negative esteem in her. She feels such a behavior is power based, illegal and invading in her space. She feels it demeaning, it generates anger and sadness within her. What constitute the sexual harassment? Forms of sexual harassment in the act. It is categorized into two different categories. One form is called quid pro quo, that literally means this for that. Implied promise of preferential treatment in her workplace or implied threat of detrimental treatment in her employment, implied threat about her present or future employed status. These types of forms of sexual harassment come under quid pro quo. The other form includes hostile work environment. So, she feels offensive or hostile work environment that is detrimental to her working. She feels humiliating treatment given in her workplace and it is affecting her health and or her safety. So, as an employer, it is the legal responsibility to provide a safe working environment for women according to this act. The environment should be given free of sexual harassment and discrimination. The sexual harassment is devastating for the health and confidence for the women employee. So, all the employers should have constituted the internal complaints committee with a chairperson, a woman working at senior level as employee, minimum 2 or more than 2 members and an external member. At least 50% of this internal complaints committee should have women. What are the functions of internal complaints committee for women? The functions are the most important one, prevention of sexual harassment by conducting awareness programs, workshops in the place of employment to bring awareness towards all the employee. This committee also receives complaint from an aggrieved women and also is doing a good redressal mechanisms to the aggrieved woman. And the committee conducts inquiry against the respondent. It generates a report on the inquiry and sends recommendation for the action by employer if the complaint is upheld. And it also sends annual reports to the employer. This committee functions in totally impassionate manner in good faith. Based on the reports of the inquiry, the disciplinary action will be taken according to service rules. If the service rules are not applicable, then the recommendations are given in this act, and they include the disciplinary action up to termination. Also the recovery, financial recovery from a respondent in case of damage, and also the complaints committee looks and addresses in underlying factors that contribute to sexual harassment at workplace. No more sexual harassment of women at workplace. There should be zero tolerance for such unwelcome acts. Let us make our institute and our nation an ideal place for gender sensitive equality. Thank you. Now, I will hand over this to Dr. Sonali Sarkar. She will give the applications in the institute of this act. Thank you.
Vanakkam, Namaskar, hello. JIPMER is a place where thousands of people come every day, either for work or as patients, their relatives or people attending to them. People in JIPMER are drawn from the larger society that we live in and reflect the mindset of the society we live in, the country we live in, India. We, being a patriarchal society, unfortunately hold prejudice against women, wherein many actions that are not aligned to the principles of justice and equality are considered normal, natural and are accepted without reason. Though people of all gender visit JIPMER, in this present context we are talking about men and women. We understand that there is a hierarchy and an equation of power in the relationships that exist between men and women in our setting, like that of the relationship of a doctor with his or her patients, and that between the teacher and students, that between different cadres of staff, among faculty colleagues, and also in the different cadres like the outsourced personnel or security staff or the Safai Walas. In every cadre we have a hierarchy and an equation of power between men and women. Unfortunately, what happens is in our setting, men and women interact very closely in the process of providing care to the sick. At JIPMER 24/7 activities are on, which gives ample opportunity for actions which can become discriminatory or be considered as harassment. As an institution working for the mankind and trying to remove the suffering of people, we should not be the cause of suffering to anybody. Upholding the principles of justice and equality as envisioned by the Constitution of India is also the mandate of JIPMER. In this context, we need to provide safe working space for women, which ultimately benefits not only women, but also men, their families, the society and the country at large. Living in denial is easy, but accepting that such actions do happen and such acts may happen and trying to prevent them may seem tough at the beginning, but ultimately it is beneficial to us all and should be the way ahead for us as an institution. So, awareness is the key, as Dr. Bhavana just now said. We all need to be aware about what is considered as sexual harassment and who can be an aggrieved woman and to whom we can go with such a complaint. So, in the absence of awareness, many people continue to suffer in silence, not knowing, not even aware of the existence of a committee in JIPMER where they can go and complain about the incidences that happen to them or in their surroundings. Dr. Bhavana has just spoken about that act that protects women at length, but we need to be aware that no law in the country can actually protect women unless women themselves come forward and raise the issue or complain about what is happening to them. So, what happens with our Indian mindset, in spite of the so called modern views and empowerment of women, when such incidents happen, it is always considered to be the fault of the woman who suffers the harassment, and therefore, women are hesitant, feel hesitant to come out in the open, talk about it or go ahead and complain to the authorities about it. But if it is neglected, it escalates into what happened as an incident we saw to Srimati Bhanwari Devi. So, to prevent such things, we need to be open and talk about it. So, we need to do this as more and more women enter into workspace. There are more women working in JIPMER today than any time before, and therefore, we have to respect their sentiments and address the issues of equality, and utmost is their safety. So, once we provide them safety, women will feel confident and comfortable to come for work or come as patients to JIPMER to seek care for their near and dear ones and make JIPMER a better hospital and contributing towards the welfare of the community and the country. So, let us all strive towards this. Let us make JIPMER a safer working place for women, and to do that, let us come out in the open to report such incidences that happen, that we come to know of, to the Internal Complaints Committee for Women. This committee is accessible to all women of all cadres and all women, even if they are visiting JIPMER, not even working at JIPMER, because that is how the law is It protects everybody, even women who visit workplaces and face harassment can come to the complaints committee and report the issues and incidents, and the committee, as Dr. Bhavna Bede just now suggested, takes actions, redressal actions. So, let us all work towards a safer JIPMER, safer community, safer country for women, not only to make this world a better place for women, but for all of us. Thank you. Jai Hind.